Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, and this is episode 177 of the Baseball Podcast on Monday, April 6th. I appreciate everybody listening out there. We got a great show lined up for you today, talking coronavirus here in the first segment, giving everybody an update on what's going on both nationally, internationally, and then referencing, obviously, Major League Baseball. They've released a few different reports since I spoke to you guys last Thursday about what their thoughts are to start up the season. Once again, President Trump held a phone call with all the commissioners, and we're starting to get more and more information that's come out of that phone call. But in the second segment, a new segment, it'll be a reoccurring segment here since there's no active Major League Baseball. Well, our friends at Strat-O-Matic are going through a simulation, and I'm going to discuss the results of that simulation and what's going on there as if it were actually happening. So we'll make that a reoccurring segment there, segment number 2. And transitioning into 3 and 4, last week we talked about Cy Young winners, my prediction on who's going to win those. This week we're going to talk about, this Monday we're going to talk about the AL and NL MVP. Give you guys a presentation or a prediction on what's going to go on there. And then in the 5th segment, we'll talk a little bit more about the Major League Baseball draft, specifically some of the later round picks in the history of baseball that aren't going to have the opportunity if they shorten the draft this year. And then finally, in segment 6, I'll talk to you guys about the best minor league logos. Last week, we talked about the best major league logos. This week, we'll touch on the best minor league logos. But jumping right into it here, the coronavirus. We continue to discuss, obviously, the current events that are going on around the United States as well as the world. We are up to 1.2 million confirmed cases worldwide and over 330,000 now in the United States. Once again, the U.S., the country with the most positive cases and unfortunately over 9,000 fatalities. And that's reading what the experts are writing, what they're saying during all of these news conferences, based on some of the charts and the diagrams that are out there. It does look to be that the next 2 to 3 weeks are going to be the apex of this pandemic, of the coronavirus, COVID-19, because the shutdown or stay at home, I guess I should say, orders that over 30, now 40 states have put their populations in. It's going to take 2 weeks to a month until once you stay at home, we find out who is sick, who isn't feeling well, and can hopefully stop the spread from those individuals. So anybody who had gotten it kind of pre-shutdown or stay at home is now coming to the forefront, and we can help those individuals, but we didn't stop or slow down anything. So once we hit the 2-week mark, everybody should know, and then it should start to decline because everybody's been at home, so they haven't been able to share or spread it with the asymptomatic or the individuals who don't show any symptoms, obviously being one of the main causes or concerns, because if you have the disease, don't show any symptoms, go out, spread it to others, even though you don't show any symptoms, they could get it to a version that obviously is much more fatal for them than it is for yourself. And doctors are trying to figure out why that is, why it's affecting some individuals more than others. They haven't come to a conclusion on that yet. Bill Gates out there, he's going to fund 7 different factories for 7 different possible vaccines. He basically stated that, yes, it'll be a waste of money for probably about 5 of the factories that ultimately don't end up working. But if we wait to find out which 2 of the 7 work, then build the factory to distribute at a mass level, it'll be too late, and it'll be obviously quicker if they do the factories, and then once they figure out which ones work, just shut down the ones that are not, fighting the virus. And obviously they're going to repurpose these factories once completed. So I'm sure Bill's not going to lose money. And even if he does, the factories that will produce the vaccine, I'm thinking will make enough that he's going to be walking out of there with at least a profit on what's going on. But shout out to Bill Gates putting a lot of his own money into producing these factories, building these factories for the quickest way to get a vaccine. But bringing Major League Baseball into the conversation here, one thing that has been released in regards to the MiLB draft that was supposed to be in June could now potentially be in July. We had discussed in the past how it could be a minimum of 5 rounds, still the maximum of 40. I'm thinking it's going to be somewhere between 5 and 10. I don't know if they're going to cut it all the way down, but I do think 10 would be the maximum that we're really going to see. But in regards to scouting in the evaluation period, Major League Baseball has relaxed a little bit on their restrictions. There was 0 scouting, 0 communication as of the last couple of weeks. Now teams are allowed to use electronic communication. They can call these prospects. They're allowed to Zoom interview or whatever company you're using out there for your video conferences now, whether it's your school, your work. A lot of people have been using Zoom. My wife and I have both used it for different reasons. But they can also watch and request videos from these prospects, throwing bullpens in their backyard or wherever it may be, against the fence, against the wall. They can now request certain videos, certain drills, certain interactions to kind of get a feel virtually of what the individual brings to the table, but still no in-person contact, still no in-person tryouts, which certainly makes sense. This just allows, too, as well, third-party media companies to continue to spread videos and things like that. Just, off the top of my head, Pitching Ninja on Twitter is a big one where a lot of college prospects will tweet to him, hey, here's my video of this pitch, that pitch, making hitters look bad. He'll retweet that video, and now Major League Baseball is able to use that video, reach out to that prospect, and basically ask for additional video. Hey, show me this, work on this, let me see your spin rate here, let me get all of your data. There's a website out there where they can get all of their personal information and medical information. I mean, when I say personal, medical history, height, weight, all of that type of stuff as well. But there is a caveat slightly. The top 300 prospects are going to have to, so think about it, 5 rounds, you go 10 rounds, 30 teams, 300 prospects. So the top 300 prospects must send all of their data and all of their video to the league office first so they can evenly distribute it throughout the ball clubs. They don't want certain ball clubs getting advantages within the top prospects. It's the rest of the amateur players that they can now reach out to electronically one-off and have a conversation and request video. But the overall top 300, I don't know which, company they're using, Baseball America, but they're going to work directly with Major League Baseball to produce that video and disperse it throughout all teams. And wrapping it up here, another report that has come out. We've discussed this in length in the past. The quote-unquote most likely scenario for Major League Baseball this summer includes playing in spring training venues without fans and taking it one step further with where the state of Florida is currently in the pandemic, the spring break issues that were happening at the beginning of the month. It is more likely and most likely that the state of Arizona in these spring training complexes are hosting the possibility of Major League Baseball. But it's definitely going to be a strain on the local law enforcement, local state resources and government, because they're going to have all 30 teams pretty much quarantined in a hotel or an apartment complex or a living facility, bus them to the ballpark, have them play within 2, 3, 4 different fields, putting all of them on television and having them bus back to the living facility, doing it with other teams so everybody can play throughout the day, which obviously makes security a huge issue. If you have all Major League Baseball players in one area, security is an issue, local law enforcement as well as local testing, local facilities, healthcare facilities. If somebody does test positive, it could spread very quickly throughout the entire league. So how do you make sure you isolate that person? Do they have to have daily tests every morning or every evening? You have to get tested, and if you test positive, you got to get out of there as quickly as possible. So still a ton of questions that need to be answered in regards to possibly playing in spring training in Arizona in front of no fans, but that seems to be the most likely. And as I've stated in the past here with GSMC Baseball, we certainly agree that that is what's going to happen no matter what time it is of the year. If it's in July, August, September, the only way they have a possibility is playing in the spring training complexes, having everybody live almost in a bubble and having the ability to test repetitively and not have it drain local resources. But that wraps up the first segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Coming up here in the second segment, we're going to touch on the Strat-O-Matic Simulation that is taking place. They are simulating the 2020 season as if it were actually happening. We're about 10 games in at this point, so we're going to talk about where the standings currently are, what they got individuals currently hitting, all the statistics. That's going to be a lot of fun, but right now, we're going to pause for a word from one of our sister shows here within the GSMC Podcast Network. Hang around with us. We'll be right back.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, as always, Kevin Mahalik. This is episode 177 here on Monday, April 6th. Once again, I hope everybody out there is staying safe. Shout out to all the healthcare workers, every healthcare worker I know, doctors, nurses, everybody out there putting themselves in harm's way in the front lines of this pandemic with COVID-19. We're continuing to fight here as a society with stay-at-home orders in 40 out of 50 states almost by now. I don't know the exact count, but it's continuing to increase, and it looks like the peak, if we stay on our trajectory, will be within the next couple of weeks. So hunker down. We're getting through it. We're continuing to march on here. I'm continuing to bring you guys quality content talking about baseball. People are like, hey, how can you talk twice a week about a sport that's not happening? Well, that's how much we love baseball. That's how much I love baseball. I can make up stuff to talk about, and basically making it up is what Strat-O-Matic is doing here. And spelling Strat-O-Matic, it's STRATOMATIC, and that is an artificial intelligence formula simulation where they are simulating day by day every single game and breaking down where we're at here. And now that we're about a week and a half to 2 weeks in, I thought it would be a great time to touch base on where we're at here, discuss performances through the first couple of weeks, and see if your squad is doing well out there or what's going on based on the predictions we had. Let's see how on point we are with Strat-O-Matic here. So I'm going to click over. We're going to look at the standings starting in the American League East. They have Boston at 7-3, Tampa Bay 6-3, Baltimore 5-4, New York Yankees 4-5, and the Toronto Blue Jays at 3-7. So a handful of surprises early on in the American League East. At the top of the list, Boston at 7-3. I talked about how the change that they had in the offseason with Mookie Betts, the David Price trade, Chris Sale getting Tommy John surgery. I didn't think it looked like a solid year for them, but a good stretch out of the gate, going 7-3. Tampa Bay 6-3. Yeah, that sounds about right. Good ball club down there. But Baltimore at 5-4, a bit of a surprise. And then obviously the biggest surprise would be the New York Yankees starting at 4-5. We're 10 games in, 9 games for New York. That means Garrett Cole will be on the mound for them once again coming up here if he hasn't already been twice based on off days. But if he's 1-0 or 2-0, for them to be at 4-5, certainly a surprise, that's for sure. Transitioning over to the Central, Cleveland at 8-2, the Indians, Kansas City Royals 6-2, Minnesota Twins 4-6, and then Detroit and Chicago at 2-7. We talked about Detroit being down there, Chicago trying to figure it out there at the bottom. Cleveland a bit of a surprise at 8-2. However, their rotation solid at the top, so a good start for them. They must be hitting the crap out of the baseball. Kansas City 6-2, certainly a surprise. They've only played 8 games. Must have been a couple of rainouts in the simulation. Of course, you got to mix one of those in. It's got to be realistic. Hey, we had a rainout for sure. And then Minnesota at 4-6. That would be a very, very disappointing start or first 10 games in Minnesota and in Minneapolis. People would not be pleased with what's going on there starting middle of the pack. AL West 7-3 Oakland A's. I touched on them. Houston 5-5. Texas 6-4. LA Angels 5-5 and Seattle at 2-8. Seattle's definitely the bottom of the division. I had Oakland as one of the first wild cards, battling with the Angels. Houston at 5-5. It's going to be interesting to see what the computer thinks of the Houston Astros, just because of all of the distractions and all of everything that happened coming off of 2018, 17, even last year with the buzzer. It's going to be crazy to see if they can get through all this and still play great baseball. So 5-5 for Houston, 4-5 for New York. Those are your top 2, and Minnesota winning it last year at 4-6. So a bit of a slow start for the standard cast of characters that I said was going to ultimately come back and win these divisions. Let's see. Jumping over to the National League East, Washington Nationals 6-3. Philadelphia and Miami both 5-5. Atlanta 4-6, and the New York Mets at 2-7. After the loss of Noah Syndergaard, their rotation has dipped a little bit in New York, down in 2-7. Washington at 6-3. I could certainly see that. Philadelphia, a bit of a surprise at 5-5. Not really. 500 sounds about right. I think the surprise is that the top team in this division would be 6-3, as well as Atlanta being 4-6. So I talked to you guys about Atlanta, New York, and the Astros being the top 3 with the Dodgers, and we'll get to them in a second. But right out of the gate, everybody's playing a little bit slow here, taking their time, getting their feet wet, trying to figure it out. The NL Central, Chicago Cubs 7-2, St. Louis 5-4, Pittsburgh 5-4, Milwaukee 4-5, and Cincinnati 3-6. So Cincinnati's rotation and pitching hasn't been good the first 2 weeks of this season. Milwaukee has come back to earth at 4-5, and Chicago at 7-2. A good start for the Cubs. Going to be interesting if they come out here and stay at the top of this division. What Theo Epstein does there in Chicago, because he's looking more to sell than he is to buy at this time. But if you're at the top of the division, potentially making a run to the postseason, that's a tough thing to sell to the franchise and to the fan base if you're going to sell players. So let's see how the Cubs continue to work out here. But finally, wrapping up the NL West, the San Diego Padres at 8-2. LA Dodgers 6-3, Colorado, Arizona 4-6, and San Francisco 2-7. So Arizona, Colorado, San Francisco under 500. The Dodgers figuring things out at 6-3, and San Diego off to a hot start at 8-2. You would assume that would mean Tatis Jr. is doing very well currently at this time. So let's transition here now to some statistics that we have so far at league leaders for the 2020 season with Strat-O-Matic currently here. Let's see. Again, we're only 10 games in, but Nelson Cruz hitting 475. He continues to rake. Manny Machado up there at 436 at the top of the list. Elvis Andrus, 412. Xavier Bogaerts hitting 400. That's an excellent list. Manny Machado with 8 doubles on the year. Alex Bregman has 6 doubles. Let's see if we can get a home run count here. All right. Soler with 6 home runs for Kansas City. Rafael Devers with 5. George Springer with 5. Bichette with 5. Trout with 4. Gallo with 4 RBIs. Soler at the top with 13. Kyle Schwarber at the top with 13. Let's see, as we continue down offensively, that's a standard cast of characters. Machado, and with 8 doubles, that's one of the big reasons why he had them at 8-2 throughout the first 10 games. Manny's settling in here, and I think we'll talk about Manny a little bit later briefly when we're talking MVP conversation, because Manny Machado as well as Bryce Harper in their second year in their current environments, I think are going to start to settle in, and you're going to see them have even better years than they did in years past. But let's see. All right. Wilson Contreras hitting 400. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We got 11 guys still hitting over 400 here through 10 games. So Strat-O-Matic on the favor of the hitter early on. Let's see if we can get pitching statistics as we continue to scroll down here. There we go. ERA leaders. David Price hasn't given up a run. Neither has Blake Snell. Jake Odorizzi, 0.6. Steven Strasburg, 0.64. So a lot of pitchers having solid outings so far. Corey Kluber with 19 innings leading the way. What, did he throw a 10-inning game? How do you have 19 innings and probably 2 starts? That's crazy. I don't know what Strat-O-Matic's getting at there for sure. But saves, Givens has 4, Workman has 4, Kennedy has 4, Hector Neris has 4. Those are the top of the list at the back end of the bullpen for Strat-O-Matic thus far. And it's fun, guys, talking to you guys about the standings and what's going on. Obviously, they do it every day. It updates at about 2 o'clock. So I'm gonna jump back here again on Thursday's episode, and we're gonna talk about what happened this week, where the updates are, how everybody's doing, where they currently see the standings. And because until we get actual baseball, the next best thing is to talk to you guys about the simulation and what's happening there, because this is one of the only ones that does it on a daily basis and keeps it up to date with all of the statistics, and it is available online. But that wraps up the second segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We talked about the Strat-O-Matic Simulation. In the first segment, I talked to you guys about the coronavirus, the latest reports about the MLB draft, as well as the quote-unquote most likely scenario of playing in Arizona in empty stadiums. But after a brief word here from one of our sister shows within the network, I'm going to talk to you guys about our prediction and preview segment. Segment 3, we're going to start off with the National League MVP. I'm going to talk to you guys about the favorites, give you some dark horses, some long shots where you can win some cash. Stick around with us. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, this is episode 177 here on Monday, April 6th. I appreciate each and every one of you guys listening out there. In the first couple of segments, we talked about the coronavirus, the updates on Major League Baseball, the draft, the most likely scenario for them to return to the baseball field and get games in ASAP. And then we talked about the simulated games. Strat-O-Matic, a fantastic website out there, is running simulations on everyday baseball, trying to give us, the people in the media world, something to talk about and something to discuss. And I am very thankful that they're doing so. And we'll continue to monitor this and talk about it moving forward. And we'll figure out who they have winning the MVP here by the end of the simulation. But we're going to talk National League to start out with. Last week, I talked to you guys about the Cy Young Award winners that I have this week. We're going to discuss MVPs on Thursday. We'll talk about Rookie of the Years, and we'll talk Manager of the Year. The week after that, I'm going to discuss all awards as we continue to move forward here in the month of April without actual baseball happening on the field. But before we jump into 2020, just a reminder, in 2019, Cody Bellinger just edged out Christian Yelich 362 to 317 when it came to total votes, and Anthony Rendon, a slightly more distant third place, but still with 242, as those were your top three. Now, transitioning into 2020, I think that we're going to see some change at the top of that list here, for sure. First off, Mookie Betts, coming over from Boston, coming over from the American League, now with the LA Dodgers. The number one reason I have Mookie Betts at the top of the list is this is his free agent walk year. We talked in length in episodes past as to that's why the players were fighting for service time for that to count, so that people like Mookie Betts, like JT Realmuto, can still reach free agency at a young age and not lose a year of just life, basically, before hitting free agency. So this is his walk year. This is his audition year. He's showing he's worth wherever in between Bryce Harper's $330 and Mike Trout's $400 million that he is going to get. He's going to be on a 100-plus win team out there in L.A. He has the second best overall WAR, or wins above replacement, over the last 5 years, right behind Mike Trout, who's number one. So Mookie Betts, now in the National League, no longer behind Mike Trout. He's got to be seen as the favorite. Yes, he's going across country. Yes, he's not going to be acclimated to his surroundings. It's going to be a new year for him. But that free agency looming over his head, I think ultimately that's why he goes out and is a favorite for the award. Number two, Ronald Acuna Jr. out of the Atlanta Braves. Last year, 41 home runs, 37 steals, still didn't finish in the top three of MVP voting. That's ridiculous. If he goes for 40 and 40 or even 50 and 40, there's no way you can't give it to this guy this year. He's just finding himself as a ball player, continuing to get better, young in age. And that's where I think it's not out of the realm of possibilities for this guy to hit 50 dingers and steal at least over 30 bases. Maybe he doesn't try for as many this year because health is a concern, and he gets, 31, 32. But if he's on base, 50 dingers, 30 steals, it's going to be Ronald Acuna. The Braves are favorites in the NL East, even though right now Strat-O-Matic didn't have them there, but I personally think they would win 100-plus games if we were having a normal regular season at this point. The only thing with Acuna is he's got to limit those mental lapses. He has some base running lapses from time to time. He has some defensive lapses, falls asleep potentially, but overall a fantastic ball player and really the future of Major League Baseball in more ways than one. And then rounding out the top three, I have Christian Yelich. Christian won in 2018, and I believe he would have won again last year if it were not for a knee injury he sustained in the month of September that allowed Cody Bellinger to close strong and ultimately sway the voters to vote for Cody because Yelich missed down the stretch and missed any postseason time with the Brewers, or would have missed postseason time. But the Brewers lost a lot from last offseason to this offseason, and that's where I believe that if the Brewers are first in the division or are right there come playoff time, Yelich is going to be the main reason why. And Moustakas is gone. A lot of other names are gone we talked about during the preview when we previewed the divisions. So if they're there, Yelich is going to be the reason. And the Dodgers may have there's more than one working against them. And next here, I have the next tier of quote-unquote options, and that's right where I'm putting Cody Bellinger. You guys are probably yelling at me out there already going, Kev, the winner of the award last year, you don't even have in your top three. Well, he's fourth. He's right behind these guys. And that's where I do fight myself that Mookie Betts and Cody Bellinger are going to steal votes from each other. Which one is going to be the best outfielder on a 100, 105 win team? And, is it going to be a combination of the two of them as to why the team is winning all those games and not specifically Acuna Jr. or specifically Christian Yelich? If the Braves or Brewers are at the top of their divisions, it'll be a fascinating storyline to keep track of if they steal votes from teammates. And next up in the next tier, I got Juan Soto with the Washington Nationals. If Washington comes out, wins 100 games, obviously the World Series winner last year, but entered the playoffs as a wild card because their first couple of months were as bad as anybody's, and then their last couple of months were as good as anybody's. So really a Jekyll and Hyde last year for the Nationals. Soto, only 20 years old. He's continuing to get better. He's the future of the Washington Nationals outfield. It's why they felt good about letting Bryce Harper walk or not paying Bryce Harper. Obviously, Strasburg, Corbin, and Scherzer take up a lot of the salary cap at the top of the rotation, but the international prospect of Soto basically said, yeah, we don't need to pay Harper $25 because we got Soto for $500,000 the next 5 years, and we think we're going to get well above, 10% of what Harper's getting money-wise compared to production. So Soto really could take that next step this year, kind of like Acuna, these younger kids finding their way, very confident now in their own abilities. And yes, they are big leaguers and they're superstars, and they could announce their presence with authority, to quote Bull Durham. The last guy I have in the next tier is Fernando Tatis Jr. out in San Diego. I know Manny Machado, based on Strat-O-Matic, he was in there with his 8 doubles, but I think if the Padres make a run and are in this thing to last throughout the summer, Fernando Tatis Jr. is going to be a big reason why. The combination of him and Manny Machado on the left side of the infield is going to be a heck of a lot of fun to watch and something to monitor for sure with baseball fans here on the East Coast specifically. I know you fans out on the West Coast are definitely watching the Padres games and that loaded, young, talented team to see if they can continue to improve and maybe make a run this year. So 3 names I have within the dark horse section or the long shot where you can win some cash if you're in a state that allows sports gambling, such as I am here in Pennsylvania. I have a Nolan Arenado, Colorado Rockies, a tumultuous offseason for Colorado. Bridges have been burned. Arenado wants to be traded. Well, if you want to be traded, you got to go out and perform. You got to say, hey, teams, come and get me. You're getting one of the best in the business, the best third baseman in the game defensively, very, very good offensively. It's a combination that is very hard to find out there on a contract that is, more and more free agents sign big-time deals. Doesn't seem that outlandish. So Nolan Arenado, if he can somehow get the Rockies into contention, would have to be considered for MVP. Pete Alonso, if the New York Mets make a run, it's going to be due to the offense. It's going to be due to Alonso right in the middle again. Another 50 home run season. Can he hit 60 this year, or does pitching adjust to it? And then finally, Bryce Harper. Like we said on Manny Machado, second year in his new city. Doesn't have to move, doesn't have to worry about where he's going to be. He didn't sign till the month of March last year, so never really found his footing in Philadelphia. I think Bryce could be in for a big year. I don't think he's going to have the average to win MVP. I think he may have the home runs, the RBIs, and the slugging percentage, but him hitting 260, 270 while all this is happening isn't going to win MVP awards. He's going to have to hit 325, 330 to see his name on the plaque. But ultimately, I think the winner of the NL MVP will be Ronald Acuna Jr. 41 and 37 last year, I think, is just the tip of the iceberg. I think we're going to get a 50 and 40 season from Acuna. I think he tightens up some of those mental lapses, doesn't have as many moments on SportsCenter where he's getting benched for getting singles for balls off the wall because he thinks it's a home run, and I think that puts him over the top, as well as, like I said, Mookie Betts, Bellinger, they steal votes from each other. Yelich's Brewers don't make the postseason, which makes all the voters come in and favor Ronald Acuna Jr. But that wraps up the third segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll pause now for a word from one of our sister stations here within the network, and when we come back, we're going to discuss the American League MVP award. Can anybody unseat Mike Trout? Stick around.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Hello and welcome back to the fourth segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. It is episode 177 of the Baseball Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, here on Monday, April 6th, and what would have been a few weeks in to the Major League Baseball season, but obviously with the coronavirus, COVID-19 that we discussed in length during the first segment of today's show is wreaking havoc, not only on Major League Baseball, but all professional sports. President Trump held a conference call with all of the commissioners from every huge professional sports league out there. I don't want to disrespect anybody, but, you know the top 12 that were involved out there. Apparently what came out of that is he believes football will start on time in August, in September, which makes me think that July would be the earliest that we could see baseball. We keep talking about July 4th as my target date. We got 3 more months until that happens, but hopefully by August, September, October, November, we'll get some playoff baseball. In the third segment, we talked about the National League MVP award. I think Ronald Acuna Jr. wins it this year. Cody Bellinger did last year. Christian Yelich the year before. Both of them will be in it down to the wire, but I think Acuna wins it down the stretch. But here in the fourth segment, we're going to talk about the AL MVP. Not as much to discuss, truly. The conversation really is more around who's going to finish second or, who can unthrone Mike Trout. Mike Trout won it last year in 2019, 355 votes or points. Alex Bregman, 335. What was a very close finish there with 20 points. And then next, 100 points back, Marcus Simon in third place. So it was a two-man race last year between Trout and Bregman. We're going to talk about both of them here coming up in just a second, as I think they are two of the top three. But you can't start anywhere else besides Mike Trout. I mean, the guy is a 3-time winner. Probably should have won it 4, 5, 6, heck, even 7 times. It's one of those almost LeBron James syndrome where your excellence or your greatness becomes almost ordinary for you, to where the voters look elsewhere and say, hey, this guy had a heck of a year. Mike Trout did his standard thing. Why don't we give it to somebody else instead of Mike for the 5th time here in 6 years? And I disagree with that. I think Mike should get it pretty much every year based on his statistics, his outcome, and the effect that he has on the game of baseball specifically. But he's only 28 years old. People forget how young Mike Trout is. He's just coming into the prime of his career. We got 10, 15 more years of Mike Trout where I have no doubt I think he's going to win 3, 4, or 5 more MVP awards and go down as the most decorated baseball player potentially in the history of baseball. The only problem is we got to get this guy to the playoffs, man. We got to get him in the postseason. We got to get him winning some games here as just an overall baseball fan, not even an LA Angels fan. But number 2 on the list, I actually put Aaron Judge. I have the Yanks being the top team in the American League this year. A lot of times the top player from the top team is at the top of the MVP conversation. And this year, I think that's Aaron Judge. I think he's going to be the best team on the New York Yankees. Now, some of his teammates will show up later throughout this segment, but like I said, I think Judge is at the top. Should hit over 50 home runs if he's healthy. He would have missed the beginning of the year, but now should be back for the season in its entirety. And again, these numbers I'm throwing out are based on 162 games. And if they play 50, I don't know, what is that, 20 home runs if he's hitting 60? So he should hit 17, I guess. And I'm just going to continue to reference numbers as if we were playing a full season. Next up, Alex Bregman in the third slot. Like I said, finished second last year behind Mike Trout. The Houston Astros are still loaded offensively, still have Zach Greinke, Justin Verlander at the top of the rotation, should still win a ton of games. He's only getting better. He's just hitting his stride, 25, 26 years old. I think Alex Bregman in the middle of that lineup, the second best team in the American League, the Yankees and Astros, their best player right at the top, and then Trout, even though the Angels aren't going to be at the top again, it's not going to be his fault, and that's why I think he'll get all these votes and still be at the top. But the next tier, I actually have one of Trout's teammates, a little bit of an outside-the-box player, pitcher, person. I don't know how to describe him exactly. Shohei Ohtani, two-way guy. He's going to be starting DHing on other days. And if you go 17-5 with a 3.1 ERA, and you also hit 30 home runs, steal 30 bases potentially because you're DHing 4 times a week, maybe not 6, that's going to be tough to walk away from for an MVP voter. You know, we haven't had a two-way guy in a long, long time, and pitchers who go 20-2, you know, are the last ones to win the MVP award, and even Kershaw, I think he was the last one to do it. But obviously pitchers who are loaded win the Cy Young, they're usually not at the top of the MVP race. But a pitcher who hits on his off days, now we're talking. Now we're getting into a discussion here on whether or not Shohei Ohtani can actually win the award. Francisco Lindor in Cleveland, he's coming up on free agency. He's going to want a huge contract. There's been talk that Cleveland's looking to move him because they know they can't sign him to the type of money that he wants, and they're going to want to get something for him, just kind of like Mookie Betts did with the Boston Red Sox. We're going to see a similar situation with Lindor in Cleveland potentially this summer. If the Indians stay at the top, that rotation so-so, Lindor's the heartbeat or the straw that stirs the drink, so to speak, for the Indians. So I think if they're at the top of the list, he's going to be the main reason why, and it's going to be tough to keep him out of that top 3. Anthony Rendon coming over from the Washington Nationals to the LA Angels. He's the third Angel on the list here. He's the only reason that potentially Mike Trout doesn't win the award. He steals some votes for Trout. If he hits over 300 hits for power, people are going to be like, well, maybe Rendon's the reason and not Trout, because Trout's always been good. But now that Rendon's here, they're finally over the hump. So maybe he's the most valuable player and not Mike Trout. And then Shohei Ohtani, Lindor, but Gleyber Torres, he may take some votes from Aaron Judge. I have him in the dark horse candidate. I know some odds makers out there have him at the top of the list, but I just think Aaron Judge is more likely to win the award than Gleyber Torres. But if Torres comes out, lights things up, he was the big prospect who I believe was traded for Aroldis Chapman back from the Cubs. Now he's coming into his own, making the Cubs regret that trade, or maybe not, because they won the World Series with Chapman, so it was possibly worth it. But Torres now is a MVP candidate. It has to be tough to watch as a Chicago Cubs fan. Next up, Matt Chapman, third baseman, Oakland A's. He plays a heck of a third base. Defensively for the A's, he continues to rake offensively. If he can reach that 40-50 home run mark, over 100 RBIs, get his average up, he could be an outside candidate for the MVP award. And then my last dark horse, coming over from the Atlanta Braves, if he can put up a year similar to what he did last year, he may find himself in conversation, and that's Josh Donaldson. The Minnesota Twins, if they're at the top of the American League Central, you would think, and Donaldson goes for maybe 40 and 120, the conversation certainly is going to be around how he came over and made the difference for this team, getting them over the hump. And Francisco Lindor in that case wouldn't be at the top because they'd be a wild card. So it really comes down to who wins these divisions and who the top players on the teams are that do. And in my eyes, like I said, I had Houston, New York, and Minnesota, which means I'm putting Judge, Bregman, Donaldson up there, and then you get Mike Trout because he's Mike Trout, and that's what he does. Even though they go 500, he wins the MVP award. So I don't know. But with the Angels being one of the wild cards, I think obviously the winner has to be Mike Trout. If you just say anybody but Mike Trout, that's a long shot in its own right. 3-time winner, should have been more, won last year. He was also dinged up, injured, in and out of the lineup, had a shoulder issue, I believe, sliding into second base. Maybe it was a wrist, but either way, missed some time and still won his third award. So going to be 28 years old, 29 this summer, right in the physically prime of his career, continuing to get better. If the Angels can make a run, stay within striking distance of the Astros, and he continues to perform like he always has, that's going to be your winner in the American League once again is Mike Trout. And in the National League, once again, I said Ronald Acuna Jr. Takes home the MVP award this year. So who do you guys out there think is going to win the award? Let us know on Twitter. You can find us there with the GSMC Baseball Podcast. You can follow the GSMC Podcast Network on all the different social media platforms. And if you like this episode, please rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening to this podcast, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher. Share us with your friends and family. If you know somebody out there who's a big baseball fan, click share, send them this podcast, ask them who they believe is going to win the AL, NL, MVP. We can have a quality conversation. But that wraps it up for segment 4. After a brief word here from one of our sister shows within the GSMC Podcast Network, we're going to come back on the other side, and I'm going to talk to you guys about some of the best draft picks in the history of Major League Baseball that happened after round 5. Because word is this year the draft's only going to be 5 rounds, so a lot of these individuals wouldn't have been able to get picked. Stick around. Find out if your favorite player is on the list.
Are you looking to get your college football fixed? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. This is episode 177 of the Baseball Podcast, here Monday, April 6th. I appreciate you listening. In the first couple of segments, we talked about the coronavirus, Major League Baseball, the reports around the MiLB draft. They lightened up some of the restrictions when it comes to scouting and communication with players, as well as the most likely scenario of playing in spring training facilities without fans, possibly come August, July, whatever time frame they're looking at. We then talked about the Strat-O-Matic Simulation through 10 games, where they have everybody in the standings as well as some individual statistics. And then the last couple of segments, I talked to you guys about who I think is ultimately going to win American League and National League MVP awards. Does Mike Trout get his 4th? That's what I just told you. I certainly think so. But here in this segment, I figured we'd dive in a little bit further into the Major League Baseball draft, because after I heard that they may only allow 5 rounds, I started thinking to myself, what types of players went later than that may not get opportunities this year? I talked about my buddy Ryan Presley went in the 13th round out of high school. If he's undrafted and not getting 13th round money, does he ultimately go to, I believe it was the University of Arkansas or Texas Tech were options on full rides? Does he go to JUCO for 1 year and then try to enter the Major League Baseball draft, or what the deal is there? So I was doing some research and looking at rounds, who was the best player ever to come out of certain rounds. And, let's talk about rounds 6 through 20, if we can fit them in here within the next 10 minutes or so with segment 5. But let's see, jumping right in, like I said, the 6th round, if they only do 5 rounds, man, that would be wild, because the best career active and then the best career all time are two different sections within each round that I was able to look further into. And starting in the 6th round, you got Anthony Rizzo, Matt Kemp as people still currently active. All time, you're looking at Tim Hudson, Jamie Moyer, Bob Boone, Tom Flash Gordon. Those individuals, Joe Nathan, an excellent closer. Let's see, Tim Hudson would obviously be the best of the bunch. Just a crazy thing to think that people like Tim Hudson won't get an opportunity. He threw for a long time and was excellent. It's just like, man, 5 rounds is nothing for baseball with the amount of minor leagues that they have to fill in these rosters. And like I said, it all comes down to budget, payment, things like that. People who would have gone in round 6 through 10 will still have the opportunity, but they will be free agents and make a ton less money, or go to college if you're in high school, or go to JUCO, or go back to college if you're a junior in college, or if you're a senior, you're coming out, you're screwed. I don't know what to tell you. But in the 7th round, active, you got Justin Turner, Dallas Keuchel, Michael Brantley, and then all time, these are some names here, but Wade Boggs, Matt Holliday, LaTroy Hawkins threw for years. Wade Boggs, obviously the one that jumps out there after the other candidates. But, man, again, you're going to hear names on this list and throughout these rounds that you're going, wow, these people wouldn't have been drafted this year if they were seniors in college. They would be undrafted free agents getting signed for $5,000. Just incredible. 8th round, career active right now, Dylan Betances, Brian Dozier. I played against Brian Dozier in college at Southern Mississippi. He actually broke the hits record at Southern Mississippi against Lehigh, my school, while we were down there opening weekend of what was his senior year. But Paul Goldschmidt, Kyle Hendricks, best all time, Tim Wakefield, Derek Lowe, A.J. Burnett in there, Dontrell Willis, Kevin Youkilis. It's just like, man, Tim Wakefield, knuckleballer going in the 8th round. Dylan Betances, he's excellent, coming off an injury for the Mets. It's just name after name potentially getting shuffled around. 9th round, the likes of Jacob deGrom, Edwin Encarnacion, all-time Fred McGriff being drafted there, Goose Gossage is in that world as well. Big Goose, not an easy call there, as I think the best of the 8th round, or 9th round, that wouldn't get called. It's just, this is unbelievable stuff that I was looking into. Active guys who went in the 10th round, Howie Kendrick, a World Series hero last year, Yan Gomes, best all-time, Brady Anderson. Y'all remember Brady out in center field? I remember him for the Orioles mainly. Marlon Byrd. Mark Fittich, I believe it is. I know he was, a little bit older, but it's just, crazy. So, best career active right now in the 11th round, Nate Eovaldi, Jock Peterson. Best all time, Doug Drabeck, Trevor Hoffman, Andre Dawson, not Andre Johnson, the receiver for the Houston Texans, but Andre Dawson and Trevor Hoffman. Those are 2 names. The best, closer, most saves all time, Trevor Hoffman. Maybe not the best, obviously Mo Rivera off the top of my head, but right up there in the top couple. In the 12th round, you had the likes here of Matt Joyce currently playing, Robbie Ray, all time. You're looking at Nolan Ryan, Jim Gatner. So Nolan Ryan goes in the 12th round, obviously turns into maybe the best pitcher in the history of baseball, at least in the new age, not talking about Cy Young or Walter Johnson. But Nolan Ryan going in round 12 just goes to show you that not all of the top dogs go number 1 or number 2 overall. Not everybody's Garrett Cole who goes in the top 2. I think he went first overall and then turns it into the largest contract in the history of a pitcher. So Nolan Ryan in round 12 wouldn't get picked this year. Just fascinating. 13th round, a great round to get picked in the 13th round. Matt Carpenter, Daniel Murphy, Albert Pujols, Lenny Dykstra, Steve Finley, Jim Thome, Rod Beck, Juan Pierre. It's just, Jim Thome, Albert Pujols, both going in the 13th round, both surefire Hall of Famers, both now undrafted free agents if they're available here in 2020. A lot of names in these rounds are fantastic players. Dexter Fowler in the 14th round, Cody Anderson, all-time, John Milner, Dave Parker. Dave Parker is just, goodness gracious, 14th round. Going right to the 15th round, Shane Green, Carlos Torres, all-time, Jose Canseco, Jake Peavy, Rick Dempsey. Jake Peavy is a guy who stands out to me in the 15th round. He had a long career. Everybody knows Jose Canseco and what's happened with him. But again, lower round picks that are just fascinating here. And rounding out 16 through 20, 16th round, Scooter Gennett, Tommy Pham, Mark Reynolds, all-time James Shields, Oil Can Boyd, Dave Stewart, a lot of quality names in the 16th round, even 17th round, David Robertson, Ian Kinsler, Russell Martin, all-time Jermaine Dye, Oral Horshizer, Kenny Lofton, Dante Bichette, 17th round for names like that. Just shows you how, much of an inexact science that scouting is in baseball and why you need this type of depth in the draft to get some of these names. 18th round, Colin McHugh, Mark Trumbo, Nick Vincent, John Rocker, Eric Snow, Dennis Cook, Mike Cameron in the 18th round, all quality Major League Baseball players. The 19th round, we're going to Adam Eaton, Josh Hader, fantastic relief pitcher, best all-time Don Mattingly, Placido Polanco, Randy Verlard. Oh, man, just quality names. And then rounding it out here in the 20th round, because I think that's really the best case scenario would be for them to get 20 rounds. And like I said, I think they get 10, a little bit above 5, but depending on where the economy is and where they're at as ball clubs, it could be as little as 5. But the 20th round, Zach Duke, J.D. Martinez, best all time, Jose Bautista, Ryan Sandberg, Jeff Kent. Oh, man, listen to that. Ryan Sandberg, Jeff Kent, maybe the best second baseman ever. Batista, J.D. Martinez, quality hitters at the major league level, all going undrafted now. All have the option to sign with whoever they'd like if available in 2020. Just fascinating storylines to think of. And, we'll continue to keep you guys updated as more and more information comes out within colleges, whether they'll have increased scholarships available for the next 3 to 5 years and then kind of scale back as things get back to normalcy. Because, again, if you're a junior who's a projected 10th round pick, I'm going back to school and I'm going to get drafted next year when there actually are 10 rounds. So I can get my 10th round money instead of now being an undrafted free agent who can sign for $20,000 in a plane ticket to wherever you're sending me. So there's going to be some turnover. And if I'm a high school kid, I'm not going as a UFA, undrafted free agent. I'm going to go to college. But does that junior coming back take my scholarship that I was supposed to take since they thought he would sign in the 10th round? A lot of conversation needs to be had here. But that wraps up the 5th segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We're going to pause one final time here on today's episode for a word from one of our sister stations, our sister shows here within the network. But when we come back, we're going to have a little fun during the 6th segment. Last week's episode, I talked to you guys about my favorite MLB logos. Well, now I'm going to give you guys my top 7 minor league logos, or the most outlandish logos that are available out there. You're going to want to stick around and hear this one, so hang on. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Hello and welcome back to the sixth and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, as always. Today is Monday, April 6th. I appreciate every one of you listening here today, sticking with us here as we're in the final segment now of today's episode. We've touched on a little bit of everything today. It's been a fantastic episode. Give you guys the update on the coronavirus, how it involves minor league baseball, what their latest reports are about trying to get back to play in spring training facilities, most likely Arizona as opposed to Florida, just due to the outbreak in the hot spot that seems to be the state of Florida after what was spring break down there at the beginning of the month as things were just starting to shut down. Florida was a little bit late to the party on their beaches, so Arizona seems to be a better landing spot moving forward. We then talked about Strat-O-Matic, their simulations, and we'll do that moving forward. Here with the podcast, we'll talk about it every episode, give you guys an update on what they think's going to happen and their predictions for this year. And then in segments 3 and 4, we touched on who I think's going to win the MVP awards in both leagues. I said Ronald Acuna Jr., a bit of a surprise winner in the National League with the likes of Cody Bellinger coming off a win, now Mookie Betts in the National League. I think Acuna is able to pull it out because those two, Betts and Bellinger, steal votes from each other, and Acuna comes out the winner. And then in the American League, despite not winning the American League West once again, I do see Mike Trout winning it. I think his numbers improve over last year. I think he stays healthy for an entire season this year, and the injuries aren't a reason to possibly give it to, like last year, Alex Bregman finishing second. A few different dark horses in both leagues I think are good long shots if you're looking to win some serious cash. If you can do that wherever you're listening. Here in Pennsylvania, we now have that option, so that's a lot of fun for us. But then last segment, I let you guys know all of the lists of Hall of Famers and excellent big league ball players that were drafted between round 6 and 20 that are going to go undrafted this year because, the minimum of 5 rounds, I'm hopeful for 10. But as further and further we get into this pandemic, it's looking more and more like 5 rounds is going to be the norm and what we're looking at for a July draft as opposed to June. But wrapping up the show here, the 6th segment, you guys who listen out there routinely know this is the fun segment here within the GSMC Baseball Podcast. I usually do a list, my top whatever of the week. Last Thursday, I talked about my favorite Major League Baseball logos. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about the most outlandish, most ridiculous, most amazing, most awesome, best minor league baseball logos out there. However you want to describe it, absurd, insane, ridiculous, awesome, radical, just all across the board. Just I saw this list and I said, man, I didn't even know some of these, doing some research. So all of these are real baseball teams still currently affiliated with Major League Baseball. Starting out at number 7, the Bowling Green Hot Rods. Every time I hear Hot Rod, I think about the toys my daughter's now playing with, as well as the movie with Andy Samberg. Big fan of the Hot Rod movie out there, for sure. If you guys know what I'm talking about, shout out to you. Awesome movie, too legit, and now I'm unlegit, and I gotta quit. But just quoting some movies out there, don't hurt on us, whoever is the police when it comes to that type of stuff. So the Bowling Green Hot Rods, they got an awesome logo, an old school car. They are the single A affiliate for the Tampa Bay Rays. And after doing this list, I figured out that Tampa Bay has the best names across the minor league system as a whole, because Tampa will show up later. They actually have the top name in my eyes, and lucky for you, if you're lucky enough to play in the Rays organization, you can get promoted from the single A Bowling Green Hot Rods to the number 1 team in double A that we'll touch on later. Number 6 on the list is the Fort Wayne Tin Caps. I almost said Tin Cups, thinking of the golf movie with Kevin Costner, but no, this is Tin Caps. And their logo is an apple with a tin pan wearing it backwards as a cap. What? Who drew this? Who was involved in this marketing campaign that was like, hey, we're called the Tin Caps. Now I need a logo. What are you guys thinking? You know what? I'm going to draw a fruit and vegetable with a backwards cooking hat on, wearing it as a cap, and we're going to go with tin caps. It's the single A team for the San Diego Padres, and they're in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The tin caps. If you can get a ball cap, a backwards hat, tin caps, man, you're just, that's a good one. That's just, gosh. Number 5. The Aberdeen Ironbirds. They're in Maryland. They are actually the single A team of Baltimore Orioles. I've driven past the Aberdeen sports complex many times, and I didn't know that they were called the Ironbirds. And, I myself, back in the day, played for the Texas Tomcats. Tomcat was a plane. Ironbird is a plane. So very much minor league baseball, collegiate baseball, likes the old school fighter plane World War II kind of mantra that, that Ironbird brings. And that's another quality logo. When I read Ironbird, I said, hey, that reminds me of the Tomcats. That was one of my favorite summers, one of my favorite teams. That one's certainly got to make the list. So if you find yourself in Maryland or you're listening close to Aberdeen, head on over and check out the single A team called the Ironbirds. Transitioning into number 4, we got the Richmond Flying Squirrels, and this logo was the main reason why I chose it. The Flying Squirrels aren't that outlandish or ridiculous, but a very quality logo of like a superhero-style squirrel flying across. The colors, I believe, were purple and white. They're a AA affiliate of the San Francisco Giants. And what? Why would the Giants AA team be completely across the country in Richmond, Virginia, if they have to go to San Francisco? What if you need to call somebody up directly from AA? They got to hop on a plane for 6 hours to get to San Francisco? I never understood that with different teams. The Philadelphia Phillies, Philadelphia, Reading, Allentown, AA, AAA, all within an hour, hour and a half of each other. You're going to call somebody up, they're hopping on the turnpike, and they're there in an hour and a half. You need a starter from AA, and the Richmond Flying Squirrels, he's got to hop on a 6-hour flight to get over to throw for the Giants. But that's a real team, man, the Richmond Flying Squirrels. That's good stuff. Number 3 on the list, the Biloxi, Biloxi, Shuckers. That's right, as in oyster shuckers. Their logo is an oyster with some sort of, mascot-looking thing in the middle of it. The AA team for the Milwaukee Brewers. And just the Shuckers, I was thinking Wichita State and the Shockers, but no. Biloxi Shuckers. We shuck our oysters. Come on down. It's what we're known for here in Biloxi, I guess. It's the Brewers AA team. Fantastic. Number 2 is probably the scariest, most horrifying minor league baseball logo, the New Orleans Baby Cakes. The fans voted for the Baby Cakes, and the origin goes back to Mardi Gras and cakes, pastries, some sort of babies and colors and everything like that. So I understand the connection between New Orleans and the Baby Cakes, but the logo, scary looking baby coming out of a cake, just like, God, I don't even want to wear that hat. I just, again, thought it was one of the most outlandish minor league nicknames, and they're the AAA team for the Miami Marlins. So you're going from New Orleans over to Miami, playing for the Baby Cakes, now going up to the Marlins. But the number 1 most outlandish minor league team, the AA team for the Tampa Bay Rays, based out of Montgomery, Alabama, the Montgomery Biscuits. What? The biscuits? And they put some eyes and a mouth on a biscuit. It almost looks like a Toy Story style of mascot. It's just, hey, if you could get promoted from the Bowling Green Hot Rods, you son, you're going to go down and play for the Montgomery Biscuits. Thanks for coming. Eventually you're going to play for the Rays. But, oh goodness, what a list. We go from hot rods to tin caps, Ironbirds, Flying Squirrels, the Shuckers, the Baby Cakes, and the Biscuits. And if you're looking for a new hat to rock out there this summer, go out and get yourself a Montgomery Biscuits hat. It'll be a conversation starter at everywhere you go, whatever bar. The ladies out there are going to be like, what is that, a pastry on your hat? What does that mean? Yeah, I play for the Montgomery Biscuits, or a big fan. So, oh goodness. But thanks for sticking with us out there for another episode, everybody. I really do appreciate it. Things are certainly crazy. Stay-at-home orders everywhere. Everybody's watching the news, trying to stay safe, trying to stay out of this coronavirus. it's insane. It's something we've never seen before. Obviously, nobody's been alive since this has happened recently, but hopefully you're making the most of it. You're finding your way. You're continuing to stay safe, stay sane, do what you need to do for your mental health. And I know that includes listening to us here at the GSMC Baseball Podcast. So before you wrap up this episode, do us a favor, head to social media, give us a follow, write us a review on the podcast, share us with your friends. It really does go a long way. If you could just tell one person out there, think about that. Then they tell one person, then they tell one person, and before you know it, you're helping us out here more than you even are aware. So thanks again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik, and we'll talk to you guys this Thursday. Thanks for listening, and have a great night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.